My name is Terry Farrelly, and I was the chair of the budget committee this past year. And the other members that were on it were Pat Carson, Mike Collier, Joe Lopez, Gwen Kester Desjardins, me, and Jeff Martinhoff, the diocesan CFO. So we met throughout the summer, looking at the budget and fine tuning it. And I would say that there was quite a collaborative process to come up with this balanced budget. And so there was input from the diocesan leadership, as well as info from or review by the HR committee about salaries and the investment committee based upon how much we'll be taking from the investments. So as I said, the budget is balanced, and it's gone through this budgeting process with budget committee. It's been taken to the finance committee and also taken to the executive committee for review and approval. So with all that said, we can go through the details of it, and Jeff, take us away.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Terry, and thank you to that whole committee. It was really a great budget season this time. Well, it's been every year we've had a good budget season since I've been here. So I will show you the budget and walk through some of the detail in the budget. And then I'll show you a couple other financial details that aren't part of the operating budget, but that I think it's important to note. So with that, I'll share my screen. The budget you can find on the EDSD Convention website. If you need numbers, you can see a little better than these. But Terry, are you seeing the budget?
I am, but it's
Great.
a little small.
Okay.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, so this is the proposed budget for convention. As we have for the past few years, we've broken it out by functional area. So each of these represents essentially a member of the executive team. The Episcopate is the bishop and her cost. Evangelism, discipleship, and growth is Canon Jason Evans and his staff costs. Leadership and congregational development is Canon Gwen Lynch and her associated ministry areas. Mine is stewardship, and these overlap a little bit between us, but by and large, these columns represent what we're spending in each of those areas. And so if you add them all up, you'll see the total budget column. And for comparison, I have last year's budget presented as well. You'll see just right off the bat that last year's budget, we had a very small deficit projected. This year, we got even closer to an exactly balanced budget, but for all intents and purposes, we tend to think of it as being a balanced budget if it's about $10,000 or less deficit or surplus. A couple of the big changes from last year to this year are in contributions and grants. A big change in our operating budget this year is that we pulled out the use of a lot of special funds, which includes some grants. So since those special funds, which I'm going to go over at the end of this presentation, since they have restrictions on them and cannot be used for anything, they're really not part of the operating budget. We changed accounting systems last year, and we now have the capability to split those revenues and costs out separately from the operating budget. So they're no longer reflected in the budget. And that's why this 141K drop in revenue. You'll see throughout that we have a near equivalent drop in expenses that offsetted those grants in the old way. But short answer is the drop in grants is from an accounting change. Another one that was a big change in the revenue side is this other income line. Starting last year, the diocese began hiring clergy to work in congregations in some cases where where two or more congregations could not afford a full-time cleric. but wanted to provide benefits. If we were able to hire a cleric who could fill both roles, in other words, say half-time at congregation A and half-time at congregation B, we put them on diocesan payroll so they have benefits, and then we bill those two congregations for those costs. We had several positions like that last year, and the billings from those congregations is the bulk of this number on this line. And you'll see it dropped in 2025 because we project fewer of those kinds of positions next year. We've had few retirements and other changes. So while there is a drop in revenue there, there's a corresponding drop in salary expenses to offset that. Salary expenses, you'll see, is a big change as well. It dropped a lot for the reasons I just mentioned, as well as there were a couple of other diocesan positions that are no longer needed in the 2025 budget. Travel expenses dropped a little bit because General Convention was in 2024. General Convention, most of the cost of General Convention is travel. So not having that expense in 2025 saved us some money on travel. You'll see the only area we had a pretty big increase in expenditures is on facility maintenance. The building in Ocean Beach, Episcopal Church Center, where I'm sitting now, is the headquarters of the diocese. It was built, or the improvements were made on this building about 10 years ago. So those improvements are about 10 years old and they're starting to age out. So we're planning on, we've had a couple of unexpected repair and maintenance costs in 2024, and we're trying to get ahead of those in 2025. So we plan on additional scheduled maintenance in 2025 to stay ahead of the aging building. You'll see down below one other change. This is a minor one, but one other change in grants is that there's an increase there. In addition to the salary changes I mentioned a minute ago, the change in positions we need, both for congregational clergy and diocesan staff. There are a few positions where we did that same kind of joining of resources I was talking about with clergy persons. So, for example, employee A might be doing some specialized ministry and be working for us 40% of the time. They might be working for a partner agency 60% of the time. Grants have increased because some of the positions that were on our payroll, that 40% position, we moved to be on the partner's payroll so they would get benefits. And then we pay that 40% to the partner. So that's a grant to the partner. So that's the increase down here in grants and other support. And that takes us really to the bottom line. Like I said, a deficit of about $1,500 compared to last year's planned deficit of about $5,400. So we were pretty excited about that, and would just say that it really made the budget easier by pulling out a lot of the special projects that have funding from other places. You'll notice that the operating budget is funded primarily from your assessments, congregational assessments, and from investment earnings on our endowment. That's the bulk of our revenue here. And the operating budget is pretty tight. It's a little bit of an exercise every year to make the operating budget work. We've done it every year that I know of, but it is a little bit of work. And I just want to clarify that there's a lot of other projects that the diocese has started under the strategic plan that do not fall under the operating budget, and we're going to go over those in a minute. So there is some other spending that's planned for next year to continue, and we've pulled that out of the operating budget for ease of accounting purposes, and because it doesn't technically meet the description of an operating budget. Terry and I are recording this alone right now, so I'll stop and see if Terry can think of anything I missed or anything I need to add on that page before I need to go on.
No, the only point I would make is just separating this operating expenses and income has been really helpful in looking at the budget and being able to feel comfortable about, where things are being spent.
Great. Okay, so that's the overall master budget that you'll be voting on at convention. What went into that budget more specifically? Well, we've got that on this page. You can see that I've split it. The Episcopate I did not put on here. The costs of the bishop really don't change from year to year. It costs about the same to have a bishop, no matter what year we're in. So it's not listed on the sheet, but obviously funding the bishop's office is a high priority in the diocesan budget. The other areas, the other executive staff areas I've listed here, some of these are ordinary items, but again, back to the operating budget. The operating budget really has pretty ordinary items. And you can see here what some of those items are. For example, in Ken and Gwen Lynch's area, the College of Congregational Development is a school for lay leadership to learn how to develop congregations. It was started under the strategic plan a few years ago and has been moved over to the operating budget now, which is our plan for many of these strategic items, that we would start them with special funds, and as they grew and become self-sustainable, move them to the operating budget for longer term support. You can see Clergy Conference and Diocesan Convention as part of that budget, planned ordinations for 2025, seminarian support, which doesn't have an operating budget impact because we do have some endowments to support seminarians, and support of Episcopal seminaries themselves. So those are some of the kinds of items that are in the leadership area on the budget. In Ken and Jason Evans' area, some of the items, you can see, I'm not going to read every item here, but you can see a lot of strategic missional initiatives in this area. Campus ministry was started a few years ago, and the operating budget has started to take over some of those costs. Whereas, say, the church plants, St. Bridget's and Resurrection, which have been going now for a couple of years, those are funded by special funds. So they're not in the operating budget, but they are funded in this financial plan. And I'll show you that special funds budget in just a minute again. Several other items were factored in to that area's budget, including Leadership Academy, which was brought back last year. The West Coast Collaborative, which is the successor to the School for Ministry. A new youth missioner position. Our youth ministry's really been taking off and needs additional support. Border summits for border ministry and border migration minister, as well as continuing support of some of our diocesan partners. Finally, in stewardship, some of the areas that are funded in this budget are a plan to retire a congregation's debt in the middle of next year. That may not happen, but we've planned for it so that we don't rely on that income in the event we need to restructure that debt in the middle of next year, and we won't need to rely on it in the last half of the year. Also, operating grants to several congregations to help some missions with their day-to-day costs. We did, again, some major upgrades on this building, the ECC. Those were funded for 2024, and we're planning on some of them being funded for 2025 outside of the operating budget using the unrestricted reserve. That's really a new roof is what that is. And so that will come from unrestricted reserves. And property grants to help missions and apps with property costs continue to be funded. So that's kind of the threat. There are, of course, other items. These are the significant items I wanted to call your attention to. And those are the kinds of things which the operating budget funds. Of course, there are some special projects on here as well. We'll go over those in a minute. But I just wanted to emphasize the regular sort of nature of the operating budget. And the other things that went into the operating budget are these assumptions at the bottom. As Terry said, each of these associated committees validated these assumptions. And we took, for 2025's budget, we repeated 2024, took 4.5% on our long-term endowments. We took 6% on our unrestricted reserves, 2% on unrestricted treasuries and money markets. We planned on a 5% increase in health insurance. We budgeted a 3% waiver for CLS for congregations that can't afford their CLS payments and apply for waivers. And we budgeted a cost of living adjustment for all employees who have been with the diocese over a year at 2.5%. So once again, I'll pause on this page to see if Terry wants to add anything else before I move on.
Nothing to add.
Okay, great. So that's really wraps up the operating budget that you'll be voting on at convention. I did want to show you, that's not the extent of what the diocese is doing. The diocese is doing a lot of special projects right now. And most of those special projects came from the strategic plan, and they have been funded with special funds that can't be used for operating costs. So many of the costs we just looked at cannot draw on these resources because they were donor restricted or restricted grants. So it's important to keep in mind that a lot of these projects are moving forward without any impact on the operating budget and are being done with special funds. Those projects range from church plants in Oceanside and Ocean Beach to new development projects in Bonita, redevelopment in El Centro, our mission real estate project, to build sustainable projects on our vacant land in the diocese. Some of the campus ministry, a new campus ministry is starting at Cal State San Marcos, and that's being paid for by special funds. So you can see over the next 5 years, we're planning on an additional $1.2 million in special fund expenditures that just the operating budget just doesn't have room to do those. So we're able to do these strategic developmental projects, namely because of your generosity in the Courageous Love campaign, as well as some of our generous grant makers who have given us grants to do this work. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation. Terry, you have anything else you want to say?
No, I just want to point out that you have that fund used.